what approaches do you think organizations should take to make sure that the company is aligned with their DEI efforts?
So there needs to be, so to achieve true inclusion within an organization, there has to actually be alignment on 3 different levels. So one is organizational inclusion, the other is work group inclusion, and then line manager inclusion. So when you're talking about organizational inclusion, you're looking there for what policies are in place. Does the organization create and actively support employee resource groups? Is there a clear mission statement around diversity, equity, and inclusion? And is that, do the company's values really underpin those same kind of principles? Is there that golden thread? What training is in place? Does the organization create space and forums for these conversations to be happening? You know, are there mentoring and sponsorship programs for underrepresented groups? So there's all of these different things, and I think there's probably Erin can no doubt add a ton more things, but at an organizational level, like those are the things that you're kind of looking for. But then the work group inclusion, that's your sort of day-to-day experience, and is really the sort of norms within which the team operates. And so you can actually, sometimes you'll see the differences when people ask, how is it to work at this company? Well, it's great if you work on the engineering team, but you don't want to work on the marketing team, right? Like it's these kind of sort of differences, which are, you know, are there fair employment reviews? Are people valued for being themselves? Do you get the opportunity to contribute your input? Is there a safe way to report grievances? And so again, this is really the sort of definition of how you know, at a team or departmental level that you're really kind of operating. And then the other area is actually line manager sort of driven. I personally think this is one of the most overlooked areas. So, you know, companies will feel that, you know, we got these great team dynamics, we got all the things at an organizational level. Well, actually, my experience is going to be so shaped and so defined by my day-to-day interaction with my line manager. And here is where you see such a big difference between whether line managers authentically kind of buy into this, and number two, their actual skill set around being able to manage, you know, and kind of lead in a really inclusive way. There's tons of surveys. I mean, the Gallup survey being probably one of the most well known about people leaving managers, and I think as relates to diversity, equity, and inclusion, this is a huge one. It's still the sort of biggest culprit. When I launched Harper & Gray, it was one of the reasons that I knew that I absolutely needed to have a support in service line that developed managers through executive coaching in this area, because if you've been used to leading teams that look like you and think like you, and then all of a sudden there's all these diversity initiatives, but there isn't necessarily that kind of support, I think we really do need to kind of meet managers where they are, and it needs to be a priority for organizations, because for them to be aligned, you're looking at you know, how well they are role modeling, you know, failure and approach to sort of risk, and how well they sort of, do they value good decisions over being right? Do they help their team to kind of lean into discomfort? Are they fair, transparent? Like all of these different things that, you know, sort of go into the impressions that employees are kind of left with. So I would say it's kind of the combination of those three things. If one of them's misaligned, then I think it's very, you'll see that come out in engagement surveys and kind of feedback, and you won't hit the mark.
Yeah, and I think so. Taking a step back for us, because we have such a global brand, right? This really big brand. Our employees are always looking to see, how do our internal efforts align with what is happening externally? So we spent a lot of time thinking about that. And for us, it was setting up a framework, and we have 4 pillars, and I can talk about them a little bit. But I think the idea of having a framework that crosses different areas of the organization and how you approach DEI efforts is critical. So we call them our 4 pillars: feet, tongue, heart, and wallet. So feet is all about how we show up in the community, our community relations efforts, our volunteer efforts amongst employees, how we partner with our partners, like, you know, Chase Center is named after, in showing up to have programming for different areas of the community, and also how we align with government entities and community organizations. So this year, for the first time, we supported legislation, which is not something we've done in the past, that falls under the FEET framework. And then we have tongue, which is how we talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion in our social channels and marketing and in PR efforts, but not just how we talk about it. It's looking at what voices we choose to amplify, because so much is about how you use your platform to amplify others. And then we have heart, which is a lot about what Ginnette talked about. It's all the internal stuff, and that is sort of run by HR. So our reviews and our hiring and our training and development, and you know, tracking different goals and metrics throughout the organization, all of our pulse surveys. And then last is wallet, and that shows up in 3 ways. We have our Warriors Community Foundation, which is how we donate money. And we're looking at those organizations that we're donating to and making sure they're doing the type of work that we want to see, and they represent the population that we want to support. But it's also about how we have diverse suppliers and who we're spending our money with, and building that network, and really looking at our procurement function, and also how we partner with people. So we've audited all of our partners, which is a really large source of revenue for us, and making sure that they are aligned with us on DEI efforts. So it has to be bigger than just what you're doing internally, which is absolutely critical. And that's what I work on most of the time. But it's also about making sure that what you're doing externally and in other parts of your organization are aligning with that as well. So that group that works on the 4 pillars, we meet regularly. We're reporting out to the organization to hold ourselves accountable. We've talked about it externally, so that we're also holding ourselves accountable to our fans and our community and all of those stakeholders. So I think that that's a huge part of alignment, is looking beyond just those internal practices, and also looking at how you're interacting with your community, with your clients and customers, and all of those different stakeholders.
Fantastic. You know, I think one of the things that companies absolutely have to do if they want, you know, a more diverse workforce, it has to start with your recruiting process. And what are some concrete things that companies can do to diversify that recruiting pipeline?
Erin, do you want to start this one?
I can start. So, you know, we're really lucky, and many sports teams do not have an actual recruiting function. We're very lucky to have a fully built out one that can spend a lot of time on pipeline development. The NBA is also great, because they have a function that is just dedicated to helping teams improve their HR practices. And so they are a resource, and they have developed a lot of relationships with professional organizations that represent diverse or different demographic groups, with different colleges and universities, like historically Black colleges and universities. But we also do that work in developing those relationships. A lot of thought is put into how we approach our internship program and making sure that we're going to diverse organizations, diverse universities, and looking at the number of Pell Grant recipients and the number of first-generation college students, because to the point Ginnette made at the beginning, diversity is not just about race and ethnicity. Right. It is also about all of the other ways that we show up. Thinking a lot about accessibility as we go through recruiting. And I think that's sort of the fourth thing that people are talking about more: diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility. Figuring out how we make sure our recruiting process is really accessible for people so they can fully participate in it. And then making sure that your panels are diverse, because I believe, and I think the studies show, people want to work in diverse workplaces. So when they see that diversity within your organization as they go through the process, they are much more likely to want to join your organization. But we also do a lot of virtual programming where we're targeting different groups of people, having people learn about our organization. So much of sports is about networking, and people don't have the opportunity to network. So we try and set up opportunities for people who wouldn't normally have exposure to actually network with people within the roles and with senior leaders within our organization. So that's a lot of what we're doing. And I know Ginnette probably has a ton of ideas too, since staffing is her background.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just kind of flag a couple of them. I think, you bring up a really great point, Erin, which, first of all, I think it is about candidate selection is kind of where it really starts. So asking questions to sort of, really make sure that even the parameters that you've put in place to hire someone, are they necessary? So, take a college degree. It's just an automatic now for people to put on there, must have a bachelor's. But actually, many of these jobs, you don't need a degree for. And I was just speaking with a nonprofit yesterday that is really focused on promoting kind of stars into kind of the workforce, so people skilled through alternative routes. And so there's 70 million of them in the US, and 61% of them are happen to be Black and Hispanic. And so just actually really being quite conscious of the sort of the criteria that we're putting in place, and making sure that that's not exclusionary. The same thing with schools. The organization that I worked at for many years, we want to see candidates from this school, and this school, that costs an absolute fortune to kind of go to. And so we saw very, very similar demographic coming through. You then layer on a referral program where you start driving referrals, and then before you know it, you can see why every single person looks the same. So even just thinking about maybe, referral programs are amazing, but perhaps you de-weight them, and that's the way to kind of create balance, that you're really careful about the schools that you're kind of going to, and making sure that they're representative. And then I would also say, a lot of organizations from a recruitment standpoint, they find it easier to implement the initiatives to diversify entry level and middle, sort of mid-level, where I think it's really important that organizations are taking a look at board level. And so even if that means that you are adding more board seats or adding more seats to your senior leadership team, fundamentally that's where the power dynamics are in an organization, sort of, whether we like it or not is kind of fact. And for people to actually really feel that they are part of a diverse and inclusive culture, they need to look and see representation of people who look different at the top. Board level recruitment is extremely intimate, right? It's kind of like you spend a lot of time when you're on a board with people, and I would say that tends to be more who you know than anything else, right? So it's kind of, you get played in. And so if companies are not really intentional about doing that different, again, is kind of more of the same. And that's where we know that real impact and real change can kind of happen. So to Erin's point, even working with suppliers that are diverse when it comes to filling those board seats, don't just go to the same executive search team that you've always been using, where they don't have an ounce of diversity on their team. You need to kind of, if you want to get different, then you need to sort of operate different and kind of work with different suppliers who are diverse themselves.
Yeah, and we cannot underestimate that once you have people in the door, this is where the equity and inclusion comes into place, right? Like, you can hire all the diverse people you want. They are not going to stay or actually contribute to your organization in a meaningful way if you're not doing the other stuff in the next part of it. So I don't want to underestimate how important diversity recruiting is, but it's like it's like the tip of the iceberg, and organizations have to do so much more.
I think we're going to have